welcome to the Up and Up. I'm Jodi Newell, and I am really excited to have another Jodi here with me. Her name is Jodi Clemens, and she is from Iowa. I just would like to get right into the conversation. Jodi, thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah. Well, I think we should probably start this conversation talking about, well, I guess the dumpster fire that is on everyone's mind, right, of the Iowa caucuses. And one of the reasons why I reached out to you is because you're actually in the planning and instrumental in trying to make sure that a dumpster fire like that doesn't happen again. I was wondering, what has that process been like for you? What, kind of talk about the experience of the Iowa caucuses through where we are now and what is happening to ensure that it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, absolutely. I am over in Eastern Iowa. I've been a Democrat for many years. This was definitely not my first go around in the Iowa caucus. First and foremost, the caucus process itself here in Iowa at the precinct level went very smoothly. I mean, our volunteers were amazing here in the state. The volunteers really showed up, and it was a lot of party building, which is the primary one of the main reasons that the Iowa caucus is so special is that we're able to do so much party building at these events. In terms of what went wrong the night of, a lot of it came down to like the reporting app.
Right.
It was kind of, I wouldn't say rushed, but it wasn't available to download until just a few weeks before the caucus. So there were some glitches there. We're expecting a full report as to like what went wrong. I'm on the state central committee here in Iowa. So we have a meeting this Saturday, and we're hoping to hear a full report here soon.
Wait, I'm sorry. I just want to clarify really quick through this. There hasn't been a full report yet. Like this is now, I just feel like to my mind, I would have expected that already. No?
Yeah, we've been waiting for a while for it. I got elected to the state central committee this past summer. So yeah, it's been a while coming. They were needing to interview a few more people with the DNC and just really get everything to be able to give us a full report. So we're looking forward to seeing the details of that this weekend. One thing that I see as something that definitely needs to change here as far as the Iowa caucus is we need to make it more inclusive, more so more people can participate in the process. Having it on, at a certain time on, a very specific night of the week is great to be able to get there and see your friends and your neighbors, because we do these on a very small precinct level. So it is a lot of fun to get to see the people that, you may not see all the time. But, we encountered a lot of barriers. I was a regional field director for the Bernie Sanders campaign here. And, we were out knocking on doors, and we would find supporters, and they would be all in. And then we'd say, okay, can you meet us, on caucus night? And there's just so many reasons why people couldn't participate. Right. They needed childcare, or they worked. They couldn't get, retail jobs. They couldn't get the night off work. And we even had, encountered quite a few of, I'm a realtor, I'm a physician, I'm a school teacher. I just can't have my politics be that public.
Interesting.
So I definitely think that we need to find, some solutions to be able to include more people, because I think the bigger representation we have of Democrats participating in these in Iowa, the more accurate it's going to be of like a pulse, for us being first in the nation. And so, I'm a member of the DNC as well. I got elected this summer to represent Iowa. And that's one thing that's definitely on my radar to work towards here over the next few months, getting to talk to other DNC members, as well as, the people here in Iowa, to brainstorm ways that we can make this better. We take the first in the nation status very seriously here. I'm sure that you're well aware, being in New Hampshire as well. It gets pretty intense.
Yeah.
Yes. And, we definitely want to make things as streamlined as possible for the next go around. I was a precinct chair in 2016, and everything went great. I think we don't usually have this close of caucuses. So some of the glitches that we saw on caucus night were, because the race was so close. Normally we have a clear winner, and then it's not a matter of, we had to go back and check math. We had to like do some pretty intense, recanvassing and even recounting in some precincts. So definitely an unusual circumstance. It was kind of a perfect storm here in Iowa this year round. I went straight to Utah following the Iowa caucus, and that was all they wanted to talk about was what's going on in Iowa, what's going on in Iowa. So definitely we made more headlines than we would have liked to for this time around.
That's the truth. It's really interesting too. I mean, when you think about a caucus, generally speaking, I think, that's a great idea. And it's kind of, so to me, it's not quite, but it's approaching like a deliberative democracy process, right? And so this is so that everyone can come together and have a conversation and debate things. And I love the way that you can, okay, so if somebody's candidate didn't quite make the threshold, then you can go in I don't know what the word is. I would think like lobbying those people, or okay, so you can exactly
like persuasion conversations. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I think that sounds like such a good idea, but the thing to keep in mind is exactly what you said. When you have it on a certain night, and, people have children, people have jobs, people have, there are reasons why a lot of people can't show up. And unfortunately, because of that, it tends, there's kind of the balance between the benefits but not everyone having the capacity to do that. It's interesting. Yeah. I actually have studied up and seen some deliberative democracy models that talk about including childcare and including, these kind of things. And I think, wow, it's such a good idea because it should be inclusive. You want to have everybody's voice heard, right?
Absolutely. And some of our precincts did that. They brought in volunteers to help out with childcare.
Oh, that's awesome. I didn't know that.
It's just in Iowa. I mean, it's not just like one election. So it's thousands across the entire state. So, it would be amazing if we could get that put in place for on a per precinct level. But that would certainly help with that issue. But you're still going to have people that have to work or that can't leave their house. We have accessibility issues in some of the places. The Democratic Party works really hard to make sure that the meeting locations are up to all of the ADA compliance, and I think we're just going to have to look at things differently for the next go around. Especially in terms of, like if our caucus had been during COVID, we would have been hurting a lot because we wouldn't have been able to meet face to face.
Right.
And we use so many schools, auditoriums and gymnasiums and cafeterias that, we saw like in the general election and even the primary this summer that people just schools weren't opening up to outside groups.
Right.
So, yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's interesting. And so let me ask you a question, because we all know Iowa as the first in the nation and the caucuses and this kind of, way of going about it that people aren't familiar with, but are now. I mean, let's be real, after 2020, after the primary, which was actually 2019. But anyway, I'm sure everyone is familiar with the caucus process and all that kind of stuff. But what I think people might not necessarily know is, how does it work with lower offices, right? So you, for example, ran for state representative. How does the primary process and how does that work in that way? Is there a primary? Yeah, tell me.
There is. So the caucus is always in February. And then our primary process plays out a lot like what most states do. It's run by our Secretary of State, and it's in June. So any down ballot candidates are on the ballot for a June primary. So we actually have both here in Iowa, the caucus structure and then the actual full state non-party primary that is run by Secretary of State. So, and in off years when we don't have a presidential, so like on the midterm elections, we still do a caucus. There is the option to break out into preference groups for like if there's a governor election, but it's optional. So they don't necessarily do preferences in all precincts.
What is a preference group?
So that is what in a caucus, you basically stand in a corner of the room as to which candidate, which candidate you support.
Interesting. So actually, tell us a little bit about your race. I was so excited. I followed it personally. If I didn't mention this yet, I know Jodi and I love Jodi. So I've been following you for quite a while. And actually, it's funny. I have my my Jodi for Iowa bracelet. Anyway, but you ran for state representative, and I know that you ran a very good race. I know, what you were running on and all that kind of stuff. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Like, what was your platform, and how did it go as far as, reaching out to people in your community and things like that?
Yeah. If you would have asked me in 2016 if I would ever run for office, I would have told you no. Like that was not even on my radar. I was a Bernie supporter in the 2016 election, got really involved there towards the end. And, after the 2016 election, when we all like, oh my gosh, Trump is our president, what in the heck just happened? I felt like I had a little bit more time to prepare for that because I'd essentially been mourning since July. I kept seeing all of my, fellow Democrats were just, it was just like this grief that everybody was going through here in my community. People didn't want to leave the house. I just heard about Indivisible Iowa, or Indivisible, the national group that had just popped up with like this guidebook on how to start your own like grassroots organizing. And so I just reached out to a few of the people in my area and be like, hey, let's do this. Let's get people together. So we called a meeting and had an amazing turnout for our first meeting. We set our own like mission statement. We decided to shy away a little bit from the anti-Trump status of what the Indivisible national chapter was. And we decided to focus on the state house. The opponent that I ran against had been unopposed in 2016, and we vowed that would never happen again. We think that every single person on that ballot should have somebody running against them, if nothing else, to push them on policy, on, to have those voices. So I didn't think at that point it would be me. Somebody else had actually agreed to like follow our representative that go to all of his town hall meetings. And then they ended up moving. And so I'm like, okay, I'll step in and do this. And it only took a few interactions with him and seeing the way that he treated people, the way he could make somebody feel so small, like they didn't have the right to ask him a question, that I got out to the car after one of those meetings, and I looked at my husband and I said, yeah, I think that I'm going to have to run against him. And my husband looked at me and he's like, we were wondering when you were going to realize that. So yes, I jumped into the race super early. I announced in March of 2017, and pretty much ran on Bernie's platform. I live in a rural red district, and I was running against an incumbent who was, was already had 3 terms under his belt. He's younger than me as well, so he was definitely one of the youngest to join the legislature. But, what I found out knocking on the doors was progressive policies resonate in rural areas. People are hurting. And when I would go to the door and talk about campaign finance reform and, the soaring cost of healthcare, and, talk with farmers who were paying $30,000 in medical premiums and barely using any of the medical care that they were getting for that, I was able to make connections with people that weren't Democrats and make them see, look, we can identify these problems, but the Republicans aren't trying to solve them. Let's work together on this. And it was awesome. We ended up, my Indivisible group became like my campaign. They were, our volunteers. A lot of us were first-time political participants. My campaign manager and I were both like brand new onto the organizing scene, other than just like going and knocking on doors for, the different presidential candidates that had come through. And so we just took a very intuitive approach. We were like, hey, if it feels right, keep doing it. If it doesn't, change it up. So we did very people-focused. I did not do dialing for dollars. We did like town halls and house parties, and where I would give a speech and then people would write checks. But honestly, most of my fundraising was because I refused big money. I would only take small dollar donations. I put that right on my card that we would leave on people's doors as we were door knocking, like on the not home doors. And when we get home, we would find donations to our Act Blue of houses that weren't home. So the people that, would read through the card and be like, hey, this makes sense. And I mean, I was not shy about the progressive policies. My card had a $15 minimum wage and a public option for Iowa's Medicaid program. They had just gutted work comp here in our state and union rights. And, so we had a lot that we were fighting back against as well. And, just those policies resonated here. And so we thought we were running ahead of my opponent pretty much the entire time. We thought we were out organizing him. And then like in the last few weeks, they just turn on like a system. Like Republicans relational organizing here in the rural areas of Iowa is just like a machine. They just, everyone knows who they're supposed to go talk to. And so we ended up getting almost 45% of the vote in a rural red district, which was pretty shocking because initially when I announced I was running, they were, the state party was pretty surprised because they weren't planning to put anybody up against my opponent. And then in 2020, they actually made it a targeted race. So
really,
yes, we definitely made it look like he was beatable. Unfortunately, it ended up being like a 20-point spread on the second time around. But there was a lot of things that were different between 2018 and 2020. Trump being a big one. And yeah, I think I was. Yeah, go ahead.
So the race that was after you, the person who ran after you, that was someone who the state party, this is not necessarily they put up, I don't know that, you could tell me, but but this is someone else who is running against this Republican incumbent.
Yes. Yep.
And they did much worse than you did.
They did, yes. There's a lot of factors in that. I mean, not being able to door knock. I know that most of our success came from being able to get out there and knock on the doors and have those conversations with people. Mm-hmm. I was also very well known in my community and had worked in several of the churches and other communities. I've taught financial literacy in local churches and so it was really like a perfect storm for us in 2018. And then 2020, I mean, it was really rough for all the candidates across Iowa. We just got annihilated with the national messaging and, it was really hard to come out from under that when all you have are phone calls and ads, which most candidates couldn't afford.
Absolutely. But just so you know, in my mind, I'm going to just attribute it all to the fact that you're a very progressive candidate. And the progressive policies win. All right. Just editorializing here, don't mind. And so at this point, you're running for Democratic chair of so I should put this properly. So you're running for the chair of the Democratic Party in Iowa.
Yes. Correct.
So kind of tell me the evolution of this and how is it going?
Yeah. After I ran for the Iowa State House, I joined the Bernie Sanders 2020 campaign. Mm-hmm. I was a regional field director here in Iowa. Just such an amazing experience. My favorite part by far was getting to train new organizers, getting them to cut their teeth on organizing and just watch them just bloom into these amazing communicators. And then after Iowa, I was picked to lead the state of Utah as their state director for the Bernie campaign. And we won in a huge landslide over there. It was amazing. And then we had just gotten sent to Wyoming when COVID hit. So we were only on the ground for about a week before we all came home and then digitally organized. And so that was really where we, where we all cut our teeth, I guess, on this concept of digital distributed organizing. We already done something similar in the state of Iowa because there were so many of us organizing across the whole state. I mean, there was no way we could have in-person meetings very often, at least. And so, just the idea that you could successfully run a team, across a geographical area, we had a lot of practice with that. So after the Bernie campaign unfortunately ended, which was devastating for so many of us, yeah, I got asked to be a campaign manager for a very progressive Senate candidate here in Iowa, Kimberly Graham.
We interviewed her. I interviewed her.
Yes, right before I came on. Yeah. And so, and that was awesome. I came in the middle of the campaign, helped pull everything together, get the communication put in place, the processes put in place. And we just had so much fun. The collaborative space, we were able to build this virtual field office where volunteers felt like they had a home and just loved to come back. And we put so much of the leadership onto the volunteers and taught them how to be organizers. And so then I went to People's Action following that. And we just, it was a bunch of Bernie alumni and it just exploded. It was a group of 6 or 7 of us, and we were able to pull together a team of over 20,000 volunteers We had volunteer leaders. We had a 12-year-old that would lead some of our texting events. She is just amazing.
Oh, kids know tech.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It was so awesome. And just knowing that, when we would support the volunteers and teach them, they were just hungry to take on these roles, which made us be able to exponentially just grow this huge national program. And when I was breaking down all of these different things that I had learned over the past several years, it all came down to like, people need to feel like they belong, like they have a purpose, and to know that they are achieving goals together. Yeah. And I think that's what Iowa needs. I think we need, we have 99 counties here. Most of our counties are small rural counties. It's really hard to gain traction in membership in a lot of these counties. And I just want to bring this kind of program to the state of Iowa, where we can have this like virtual field office for anybody at any time to pop on, do some volunteering, get to know other volunteers, have trainings and leadership skills, and, just collaborate on a state level, because, and then be able to target our smaller communities together to reach out and do canvassing and really talk to people and figure out what's going on in our rural and communities of color that have been shifting red every year.
Yeah, that's really interesting. To just kind of see the shift and see the demographics that are shifting. And, I think a lot of it comes down to, like you said, going and talking to people, and especially individually. What's so tough about COVID is not being able to have that face to face. You can do it on Zoom all you want. I think, we've learned at this point to make it feel personal as much as we possibly can, but it's not that experience of being in person at someone's door and having that conversation.
Yeah, I'm so ready to get back on the doors. Yeah. That's definitely my favorite part of organizing.
You are so funny. I did it once in Nevada for Amy Vilela, and I was like, I had fun that day, and I'm like, yes, I never want to do this again, but it's cool. I don't know. Everyone's got their skills. Everyone's got their skills, and I'll do it if it's needed. You know what I mean? I'm for the team, but if it's my choice, I'm doing something else.
People are my jam. That's my favorite, talking to people.
Nice. Well, I like talking to you. So tell me about like that experience of knocking on doors. I really like to hear about what we were just talking about, like the way that when you go around, you can connect with people in kind of a different way, especially because, one of the purposes of this show, essentially what I do is I lift up candidates and activists who, are going out there and spreading awareness and, whatever about progressive policies. And so I find it really interesting that a lot of the time when you have a personal conversation with someone, if you're able to have a conversation kind of past the propaganda and that kind of stuff, one-on-one, you're able to connect. And a lot of times you're able to sway people, essentially because these are the things that they need in the first place. But tell me a little bit about kind of how those conversations go, especially in a rural area.
Yeah. So, I think exactly some of the points you hit on is that, once you can break through that initial, we in my campaign especially, we went with more, instead of a transactional approach, which a lot of Democratic campaigns take, where you're knocking on the door, hey, I'm a volunteer for this person, can we count on your support? We taught our volunteers to ask questions, to get to know the people on the doors, to find out what keeps them up at night, what their community needs. One of the questions I'd always ask was, what would you like to see your representatives do for you? Like how can we help? And I think a big piece of that is being willing to be vulnerable and share your own stories. I think when that person at the other, at the door knows that why you're there at their door, what you're fighting for, what it means to you. We encourage people to tell your stories. We had, a volunteer who lost her brother because, he couldn't afford insulin. And it's like, that is going to be such a more powerful experience. And then it's almost like it's contagious. When you're vulnerable and share, the amount of people that would share back is just, it's almost addictive. We've laughed about how, you can get into these conversations and then you just want to have more and more because
Like Pringles, you can't just have one story.
It's like we have forgotten how to talk to each other right now in this country, and we're so divided, and we need to humanize each other again, because right now everyone is seen as the other. We're not talking to our neighbors. My favorite conversations is when they would have my opponent's sign in their front yard, and I would just walk up and knock on their door and be like, hey, I'm running against that guy. Tell me what you like about him.
Love that.
And every time they would be like, oh, well, somebody just knocked on my door and asked if they could put a sign in the yard.
Oh!
Okay, let's talk. But yeah, and then they were impressed that I would still come to their door, even though I clearly knew that they weren't of my political persuasion.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we did at People's Action. We did deep canvassing over the phones. And so we targeted mainly like communities that were rural, communities of color in 8 different swing states, New Hampshire being one of those. And the conversations we had just really, dug into asking questions, being active listeners. We would start off with like a 1 to 10 scale of Biden to Trump, and then we'd talk more about it, and then we'd ask again at the end. And we found that we were moving 48% of the people that we talked to closer to Biden. And this was a bunch of Bernie progressives throwing down for Biden. It was, it was healing for a lot of people to keep to having a purpose, to getting out there and fighting, because we all know Trump's a monster. It's been a rough 4 years, I think, for pretty much all of us. And it was very healing for the volunteers as well to get to have those conversations with people.
Jodi, this is just too funny, right? Because we end up, we have things in common, like our names, but also your husband volunteers with Wolfpack,
mm-hmm.
which, I'm actually the national coordinator for Iowa. So I work with, and also just a whole bunch of different things, the Bernie, the blah, 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 all these kind of things. Do you know that I actually am a volunteer with People's Action? I work on the overdose crisis cohort. I was just on a call earlier today and a retreat for 2 days last week for healthcare. How funny is this? But I really want to, what I love about all of these coincidences kind of coming together is my favorite thing. And I haven't participated so much. I kind of am wrapped up in other things. And I really want to, I guilt myself about it, but is participating in this deep canvassing. And I will bring it up all the time because I've seen, you were probably on the same calls with me when they did the updates and, and all this stuff. I was a part of this. This is so funny. And we didn't realize that each other was here. It's all coming together.
Yeah.
But absolutely that kind of, what resonates with me, especially about what you just said, is the vulnerability. And I think that, and humanizing, right? This is all part of it. Right now, what we have is we have this left propaganda and this right propaganda and these kind of machines that are just pushing out all of these very divisive things where it just makes you angry at your neighbors. Like, I can't talk to my mom right now about politics whatsoever because it just doesn't, like, within like the first exchange, it's going to turn into an argument. And it's like, but I love you and I know you and you're a good person. But to break past that kind of propaganda is not an easy feat. So I think that that's the way we do it. If you can point a finger to someone else and you're not looking at them as like your neighbor, you're looking at them as whatever CNN or Fox News portrays them as, then you're not necessarily, you're almost like treating them as if they're someone on a screen, right?
Exactly.
Because that's what it is. You see these pictures and videos and you say, oh, well, that's what that, and then you start to associate people in your life like that. And yes, it does dehumanize people.
Yeah.
And it's amazing to me that you can break through that.
Mm-hmm. And I did it in my campaign as well, much to my campaign manager's dismay. Like online, when we would encounter trolls, and it wasn't very often because we were state level, a state campaign, so we weren't super high profile. But there were some people that would like just be mean on social media. And instead of calling them out, I would call them in. I would like look at their profile and like find a connection and be like, there's one person I'm like, hey, my dad and, my mom and dad used to, have coffee with you guys back in the day. can we meet for a cup of coffee? And like, I would just find links to people and then invite them. You know what? It sounds like we have, I'm sure there's things we can agree on. We know there's plenty we disagree on. Meet me for coffee. And I had several that took me up on it. And by the end, there were 3 people that ended up volunteering for my campaign by the end of our coffee conversation, because it was just like, okay, let's cut through the crap. Like, I'm sure there's lots of things that you heard that you are associating with me. And, I could very easily just, stereotype you, but let's talk about it. And those were my favorite conversations. Very time consuming, which is why my campaign manager wasn't always so happy. But, it also played out a lot online because I always figured I may not be able to change the person I'm talking to, but so many others are reading the way that I'm treating them. And I think that is what is so lacking right now, is just that, try to assume that people have good intentions. One thing that I was very adamant about when I was, whenever I would give speeches and stuff was, talk about the Republican leadership, because they're the ones doing the damage. Don't complain about Republicans as a whole, because you don't know how many are sitting in your audience trying to see what you're all about. And if you come right out of the gate and you're bashing, what they identify as, you're not going to get anywhere. So, just being very intentional about the way that we talk to each other and about each other. Because, I've always said, when anything happens in our small town, there'll be a line around the block at the fire station for a soup dinner. Nobody cares who's a Republican, who's a Democrat. You just show up for each other. And that's what we need to get back to.
I love it. I'm feeling all like tingly in my heart and stuff. Really, it's true. I hope that we can kind of get back to that on a broader scale. Trying to come together and find our commonalities and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just politics in general, it's been so top down. And I'm sure, as with working with Wolfpack, there's so many amazing activist groups that have popped up since 2016. We're all learning that local is where it's at. I mean, that's where we reach people. That's where we change minds and hearts and worldviews. And we need to lean on those grassroots supporters and bring them in to work collaboratively with the party. And so that's one of the main reasons that I'm running for the state chair, is because I have seen just hundreds and hundreds of just amazing grassroots supporters feel like they don't have a home in the Democratic Party right now. That maybe they've tried to get involved in their county party and, had a clash of personalities, or just felt like they weren't being heard or weren't able to offer up, maybe some new ideas. And we just need to break through that. We need to work on some wins together. One thing that needs to be on our radar for Iowa is gerrymandering. We have like the best model, like the model that should be followed by all the states right now. But we also need to recognize that can be changed by the legislature, who is now even more controlled by the Republicans than before. So, and even with that though, we need to be positive about that, like thanking them for giving us the best system in place and making sure that we don't anger them into changing it just because we organized around the issue.
Positive reinforcement.
Yes, I do not like negative campaigning at all. I think the only people that it impresses are the people that were already supporting you. So that would be one big change that I would make as state chair, which probably isn't going to get me a lot of support from certain political people. But I believe that we need to have the message. We need to be telling people what we're fighting for. That even if it's not specific policies, here's what we're fighting for. Here are the problems that we know you're facing, and here's what we're willing to do to get there.
So just one quick question, because I know we need to wrap it up. I'm not trying to keep you here forever. But I'm curious, have you gotten any type of pushback? Now let me just kind of like frame the question, right? Because you ran on a Bernie platform, right? And the Democratic Party doesn't necessarily coincide. Their platform doesn't necessarily coincide with the policies that Bernie ran for. And so I'm just curious if you've gotten any pushback, in being involved in it and things like that.
Yeah, not necessarily from the party, just from certain individuals. I've had a little bit of pushback, but their problem is with Bernie. It's not with me. I mean, I've worked alongside people of all political persuasions. The 2016 caucus should not be an issue at this point in the race. or the primary, I guess, as a whole. Overall in the Iowa caucus, Bernie, Elizabeth Warren, and Pete Buttigieg were by far the biggest vote getters in the whole state, and they ran, progressive. And so talking to, we're doing all these meetings right now of like debriefs and what went wrong and where do we need to move forward. And almost all of the people want to go to more progressive policies. It's going to take convincing those, with the national messaging, we need to give people something to fight for. We need to say what, people need a higher minimum wage. Mm-hmm. People need to be able to get health care that isn't going to bankrupt them. And so, I think definitely people are more progressive than what is being presented in the national media, for sure. I mean, even just like our cable news, they rarely cover progressives.
Right.
And so, there's that piece missing. But when you actually talk to people and explain the policies, I mean, it's pretty clear.
That's so interesting too, especially to kind of, the proof is in the pudding, right? So you can hear whatever on CNN or, these are what we're fighting for and things like that. But it's when you actually go and talk to people in your community. And the reason I feel so confident about kind of the idea that it is evolving is not only because you did that in your campaign, but also with people's action in the deep canvassing and things like this, working with the Bernie campaign and all of these kind of things. I think that those people who are on the ground know a hell of a lot more than CNN does. Or, you know what I mean? Like, you can poll people all you want. I think you need to actually go and talk to people. Both are useful. Yeah. I'm just saying.
Yes, absolutely. And so much of it is we're just getting annihilated on the messaging. Like pro-life, pro-choice. Yeah. We're never going to win that debate with people. I can't tell you how many times I got called a baby killer on the doors. But why can't we craft a messaging and a campaign around Democrats are going to reduce the numbers of abortions. We're going to raise women out of poverty. We're going to make childcare affordable. We're going to do all of these things. And we want the Republicans to work with us to lower the amount of abortions that are happening. That's something that we can run on, that we can, have those conversations with that's every time I encountered a pro-life person, I would just say, you know what, I was a teen mom. I was able to make that choice. And I kept my daughter, who's going to be 20 tomorrow, and I'm not okay with that. But, and just being able to have those conversations, I know that you can make individual contacts with people that are on opposite sides of that issue. We're letting the narrative run away from us on that, because nobody's pro-abortion. They're just not.
Right. Just a little commentary on that, because I think, unfortunately, whether it's intentional or not, unfortunately, what that does is it serves this two-party system where it's us against them, and there's constantly it's making this these distinct differences, even if they're essentially rhetorical differences. If you actually compared the policies side by side, it would be, it wouldn't be that far off. But I think that it serves the purpose of having the two-party system, and then people being able to argue against the other, campaign against the other. And I don't necessarily think, when you're talking about, I'm saying, oh, did the Democratic Party push back? Well, no, it was individual people maybe did, blah, blah, blah. But we are all individual people. When we talk about the Democratic Party, they are individual people. It's just some that have more power than others. But anyway, to get back to my point, unfortunately, I think that serves what the powerful would like.
Gotcha.
For us,
I'm not quite sure I'm understanding on that one, but.
Well, I think it's the division and being able to campaign against the other.
Gotcha.
Anyway, we're at the end of the thing, and I don't need to make it.
You're good.
It's yes. If I wanted to get into it, I'd get into it. But that's not happening today.
I just think it would be a lot more effective to be able to have those conversations with people. You know what? We all want to lower the number. Let's get serious about making that happen, because right now they're not trying to put policies in place, to help, to get more sex education in schools and, helping single moms. I mean, there's so many things that can be done that, can each tick down that number that I think we've got to try something.
Absolutely. And I love that messaging. I mean, I love the way that you put it. Excuse the commentary because it's just my cynical self coming out.
No, you're good. It's a reality. Money swings back and forth one way, money swings back in. I mean, we're big money in politics. We know this is how the game is played.
But I absolutely feel like your messaging would be a lot more effective and things like that. I really appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much, Jodi.
Thank you for having me. This was fun.
Yeah, and good luck in your race. I'm going to be watching, of course, because I always am. But
I'm excited to focus on Iowa. I'm excited to, after coming off the national campaign with People's Action, I'm excited to get some positive change happening here. And even if I don't win, I'm able to talk about this message to, a whole heck of a lot of people in the process. So
absolutely.
And you keep fighting for Iowa.
Yep. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please like it and share. You can look us up on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook. We're everywhere. And if you have the means, we would really appreciate your support on Patreon. It's Patreon /Real Progressives.